I've broken down these details in such a way that they'll leave you shocked. And trust me, you'll only understand the full theory if you watch till the very end. Because what if I told you the so-called happy ending of Avengers Endgame isn't really an ending at all, but actually the dark spark that ignites the nightmare we're heading into with Avengers Doomsday? Welcome back to MovieCast, hosted by me, Liam Harrison. Today, I'm diving into one of the deepest theories connecting Endgame and Doomsday. And the truth is, once you start looking at these details, the puzzle pieces start clicking together in a way that makes Endgame feel like just the beginning of something much bigger and much darker. When Endgame released, it felt like closure. The Infinity Saga came full circle. Tony Stark's sacrifice saved the universe, and Steve Rogers finally got his long-awaited dance with Peggy Carter. But Marvel doesn't do coincidences. That happy ending wasn't just a bow tied on Cap's story. It was a fracture. Steve didn't just go back in time and quietly fade into history. No, he made a decision that violated the very rules of time travel the Avengers themselves set up earlier in the movie. He stayed. He lived a life in a branch timeline. And the moment he chose to break away from the sacred timeline, the TVA had a problem. Remember what Loki was told in his series? Any deviation creates branches, and unchecked branches lead to chaos, the kind of chaos that births Kang, multiversal wars, and ultimately, the Doomsday scenario. Now, what fascinates me is how Marvel seeded this subtly. In Endgame, Bruce Banner insists that returning the stones will prevent branches from forming. That's why Steve takes on the mission to put them back. But the film ends with him doing the exact opposite of what was warned against, staying with Peggy. The directors, the Russos, have even teased in interviews that Steve's choice creates a separate timeline. That's the kind of thing the TVA is built to prune, and yet Steve survives, grows old, and hands the shield to Sam, which means either the TVA allowed it or it slipped through the cracks. And if you've watched Loki season 1 and 2, you know there are no slip through the cracks moments. Every branch has consequences. This means Captain America's peaceful ending is actually a ticking time bomb. The very kind of anomaly that could trigger the multiversal collapse we'll see spiral out in Avengers Doomsday. But that's only the first thread. Because to really understand how Endgame seeds Doomsday, we have to talk about Loki. Not the mischievous variant we followed in the series, but the Loki who truly died at the start of Infinity War. Think about how personal and tragic that death was. Loki finally redeemed himself, choosing to stand up against Thanos, only to be brutally killed. Now, Endgame gave us the twist. The 2012 Loki escaping with the Tesseract leading directly into the TVA storyline. But what Marvel wants us to connect is that the main Loki's death is just as important as his variant's survival. Why? Because Loki's death is the emotional wound that keeps echoing across the multiverse. Every Loki variant we see is shaped by that absence. And as we'll explore later, Loki himself becomes the key, not just to understanding the TVA, but to unlocking why the multiverse spirals out of control into Doomsday. When I step back and look at how Endgame ends versus where we're heading, the patterns start to emerge. The TVA isn't just a quirky concept introduced in Loki. It's Marvel's way of saying every decision made in Endgame has consequences. The TVA's void, that wasteland where pruned timelines and discarded variants go, is basically a dumping ground of broken possibilities. Now imagine what happens when Deadpool and Wolverine stumble into that place. That's not just fan service, that's Marvel's backdoor to bring in the Fox universes, the X-Men timelines, and eventually the Fantastic Four. Deadpool and Wolverine aren't random cameos. They're the first mutants stepping directly into the chaos birthed by Steve Rogers' timeline choice and Loki's Tesseract escape. And in Doomsday, they're going to be the wild cards that turn the tide of the multiversal war. What excites me most is how Marvel is layering this. Endgame gave us closure, but if you look closely, it also planted the seeds of every problem Doomsday will explore. Steve living with Peggy wasn't just romantic closure, it fractured time. Loki's death wasn't just emotional, it created a vacuum that his surviving variants are forced to fill. And Deadpool and Wolverine aren't just comedic relief, they're the very characters who drag in the forgotten timelines Marvel now wants to merge into the MCU. All of this, when stacked together, paints a picture that Doomsday isn't a brand new story, but the inevitable consequence of Endgame's ending. The moment Steve chose love, the moment Loki died, the moment timelines were trimmed and thrown into the void, those were the dominoes. And Doomsday is when they finally topple over. Now, before I reveal how Dr. Doom ties into all this, and trust me, his role makes Endgame look almost like the opening credits, I want to pause on Steve and Peggy's timeline, because it's the linchpin. Ask yourself, if Steve lived in a branch timeline, how does Old Man Cap exist in the same continuity as Sam, Bucky, and the rest? Either Marvel wants us to believe the TVA overlooked it, which is unlikely, or Steve's branch was deliberately left untouched. And if it was deliberate, that means there's someone or something who wanted that anomaly to persist. Someone who benefits from Steve's decision-breaking time. And that, I think, is where the true seeds of Doomsday are hiding. Because the biggest villains in Marvel aren't the ones who destroy. They're the ones who wait, who use the cracks others create. If you're still with me, here's why this matters. Doomsday isn't just another big crossover. It's the culmination of every fracture we didn't pay attention to in Endgame. Steve's dance with Peggy becomes the first crack. Loki's death and the rise of his variants are the second. Deadpool and Wolverine kicking down the wall of the void is the third. And waiting in the shadows, the one who stitches all these cracks into his own battlefield, is Dr. Doom. But we're not there yet, not quite. Because to fully see how Doom capitalizes on the fallout, we have to carefully trace how each Endgame ending wasn't an ending at all. It was the setup. The calm before a storm called Doomsday. That's where I'll stop the first part. What I've laid out so far is only the foundation. Steve's timeline fracture, Loki's death and variant survival, the TVA void, and the Deadpool-Wolverine entry point. These are the seeds. Next, we'll dig deeper into how each of these layers escalates step by step, and how they spiral toward Dr. Doom's rise and the full Avengers Doomsday connection. When I think about what makes Loki so essential to this entire story, it comes down to one thing. He's the only character in the MCU who has lived outside the boundaries of time itself. Every other Avenger is chained to the sacred timeline, born in it, fighting within it, dying in it. But Loki, thanks to that Tesseract escape in Endgame, becomes something entirely different. He's not supposed to exist, yet he does. And in the TVA, he learns a truth none of the other heroes ever see. Time isn't linear. It's a tree, branching, splitting, threatening to spiral out of control. His death in Infinity War was painful, but his survival as a variant is far more important. Because if you line up the dominoes, Loki is the first to see the bigger picture. That all of Endgame's happy endings were cracks in the foundation. Tony gets peace, Steve gets Peggy, Thor finds a new path. But Loki? Loki becomes the witness to the cost of those choices. And in Doomsday, that perspective is what turns him into the key player, because unlike the others, he understands that the multiverse isn't stable, it's dying. The TVA itself is one of the most misunderstood elements Marvel has introduced. On the surface, it feels almost comedic. Faceless workers in dull offices, a bureaucratic god machine deciding what lives and what gets pruned. But if you think about it in terms of Endgame, the TVA becomes terrifying. Every single branch Steve Rogers risked creating should have been pruned. Every ripple from the Avengers time heist should have been cut off. Yet the TVA didn't act, at least not in ways we saw. Why? Because something was changing. He who remains was losing control. The sacred timeline was beginning to split, and Steve's personal choice to stay with Peggy was like pulling one thread from an old sweater. Once it's pulled, the whole thing unravels. And the TVA, for all their supposed power, couldn't stop it. That's why I see them less as villains and more as caretakers, who were powerless to stop the cracks left behind by Endgame. By the time Loki steps into their world, the damage has already been done. He's not causing the collapse. He's witnessing the aftershock of Endgame's finale. Now the Void is where things get truly interesting. It's basically Marvel's trash can, a place where discarded timelines, pruned variants, and broken realities get thrown away like old junk. But what happens when you throw away too much? When the Void starts filling with entire universes that still have life inside them, that's where Deadpool and Wolverine come in. Think about it. Deadpool, a character who breaks the fourth wall, has always been aware he's part of a franchise. And Wolverine, a tragic hero who has died and come back more times than we can count, is the perfect symbol of resurrection. So when Marvel puts them in the Void, it's not just fan service, it's meta commentary. Deadpool represents the awareness that universes don't just disappear. Wolverine represents the persistence of stories Marvel can't erase. Together, they become the gateway through which the X-Men timeline isn't just remembered but pulled directly into the MCU. And when Doomsday hits, the mutants are no longer somewhere else. They're in the same collapsing multiverse as the Avengers, forced to fight for survival. I love how poetic this setup is because the Void is both an ending and a beginning. It's the graveyard of pruned timelines, but it's also the birthplace of new crossovers. Deadpool and Wolverine are the first ones we'll see crawl out of it, but the implications are massive. If the Void is the dumping ground of every timeline the TVA prunes, then that means entire universes like the Fox X-Men films, the 2000s Fantastic Four, even alternate Spider-Men, all of them exist somewhere in that wasteland. And if they exist, they can be found. Deadpool, with his chaotic energy, is the one reckless enough to poke around and pull those pieces into the main story. Wolverine, with his survivor's instinct, is the one tough enough to endure it. Together, they're the spark that lights the fire for mutants in the MCU. And it makes sense. Endgame ended with the Avengers fractured and smaller than ever. Doomsday needs to build a bigger army. Deadpool and Wolverine are Marvel's way of saying, the cavalry is coming, but they won't look like the Avengers you know. Which brings me to the Fantastic Four. Unlike the X-Men, who enter through the chaos of the Void, the Fantastic Four will take a different path, one rooted in science, exploration, and discovery. Reed Richards isn't just a genius, he's one of the only minds in the Marvel Universe capable of understanding how fragile the multiverse really is. In the comics, Reed often becomes the voice of reason in multiversal conflicts, warning that unchecked experiments lead to collapse. Now imagine him entering the MCU right after Endgame's cracks begin to spread. Steve Rogers' choice fractured time. Loki saw the TVA crumble, Deadpool and Wolverine dragged mutant universes into the chaos, and then Reed Richards shows up, pointing out that this isn't random. It's systemic. The multiverse isn't bending, it's breaking. And someone is pushing it toward collapse. That's when Dr. Doom comes into the picture, because Doom isn't just a villain. He's the kind of man who thrives in collapse. It's worth pausing on Reed Richards here, because his arrival fundamentally changes the scope of the MCU. Up until now, the Avengers have been warriors. They've solved problems with strength, sacrifice, and courage. But Reed is a builder, a thinker, a man who sees patterns others miss. When he enters the multiverse mess, he's not going to punch his way through it. He's going to dissect it. He'll be the one connecting Steve's timeline anomaly, Loki's survival, the TVA's collapse, the Void's secrets, and the arrival of mutants. He'll see the threads that tie them together, and he'll recognize Doom's fingerprints before anyone else. Because in the comics, Doom and Reed aren't just enemies. They're mirrors. One represents science for discovery, the other science for domination. Which means the moment Reed arrives, Doom's rise isn't far behind. Endgame gave us cracks. The Void gave us chaos. But Reed's discovery will give us clarity. And clarity is what makes Doom truly dangerous. So let's tie this back to Endgame for a moment. Why does Marvel keep looping us back to that film as the start of everything? Because it was never the end. Every choice made there echoes outward. Steve choosing love over duty. Loki dying a hero but surviving as a variant. The TVA pruning but never truly erasing. The Void filling up with discarded universes. Deadpool and Wolverine finding a way back. The Fantastic Four stepping in with answers. When you look at all of that, Endgame starts to feel less like closure and more like ignition. It's the spark. Doomsday is the explosion. And in the space between those 2 points lies the multiverse slowly unraveling, waiting for someone like Doom to exploit it. That's why when I think of Endgame now, I don't just see Tony's sacrifice or Steve's dance. I see the dominoes falling one by one, leading straight into a future where everything, Avengers, mutants, explorers, gods, has to collide just to survive. And this is where things start to get exciting, because now we can begin asking the bigger questions. What role does Loki's sacrifice play in stabilizing or destabilizing the multiverse? How will the TVA's collapse create opportunities for heroes and villains alike? How will Deadpool and Wolverine's chaotic energy merge with the more serious tones of the Avengers? And what exactly will Reed Richards discover that points directly to Doom? These aren't random teases, they're threads Marvel is weaving carefully, all anchored to that ending in Endgame. The genius of it is that we thought Endgame was final, but the truth is, it was just the first page of Doomsday's story. Loki's journey after Endgame is one of the most fascinating arcs in the entire Marvel universe, because it reframes his role from a trickster side character into something far greater. In Infinity War, Loki's death gave us closure on his story. The villain turned reluctant hero, cut down by Thanos before the real battle even began. But when his 2012 variant escaped in Endgame, we got a version of Loki who hadn't grown yet. A Loki still arrogant and hungry for power. The TVA turned that Loki into something else entirely. A god who could finally see beyond himself. And when he took his final step in Loki Season 2, choosing to sacrifice his freedom to hold the threads of the multiverse together, he became something none of us saw coming. The god of stories. This is critical. Because in Avengers Doomsday, Loki isn't just another character returning, he's the living embodiment of the multiverse's survival. Every branch, every world, every hero that exists owes its survival to him. That means when the multiverse begins collapsing into Doomsday, Loki's sacrifice is either going to be tested, corrupted, or broken. And if it breaks, everything Endgame tried to save will unravel. The TVA, meanwhile, becomes the battlefield no one expected. In Endgame, time travel was treated almost like a science experiment. Put the stones back, fix the branches, and you're safe. But the TVA shows us that time isn't math. It's politics. It's control. And the moment he who remains is killed, that control evaporates. Suddenly, all the timelines Steve Rogers and the Avengers bent and twisted are no longer being pruned. They're free. But freedom comes with a cost. Chaos. The TVA's collapse means every happy ending from Endgame, Steve's dance, Loki's survival, even Tony's peace is destabilized because without a sacred timeline, there's no guarantee those endings hold. And when the TVA falls apart, it becomes a vacuum. Power like that doesn't go unclaimed. That's where Kang, his variants, and eventually Doom step in. Endgame thought the war was over, but the TVA reveals it was just paused. The real war is the one for time itself. And in Doomsday, we'll see that fight consume every hero we've come to know. Now into this chaos stumble the two least likely saviors, Deadpool and Wolverine. It's almost absurd when you think about it. Endgame gave us operatic closure, tearful sacrifices, and grand finales. And now Marvel is saying the next big crack in the multiverse comes from Deadpool, a wisecracking mercenary who talks to the audience, and Wolverine, a grizzled mutant who just wants peace. But that's the genius of it. Deadpool doesn't respect rules, not cinematic rules, not narrative rules, not even the rules of time. He's exactly the kind of character who would wander into the TVA's void, poke at the cracks, and drag forgotten universes back into the light. And Wolverine is the anchor, the reminder that no matter how chaotic Deadpool is, the X-Men universe has weight, tragedy, and heart. When the two of them collide with the fallout of Endgame's timeline chaos, they won't just be comedy relief. They'll be the bridge. They'll drag mutants into the same story where Avengers and the TVA are fighting for survival. And suddenly, Endgame's quiet ending looks like the first domino in a storm that even Tony Stark couldn't have calculated. The symbolism of Deadpool and Wolverine entering through the void is one of my favorite storytelling choices Marvel has made. Think about it. The void is where broken timelines go to die. It's the place where the TVA dumps anything it can't control. And yet from that graveyard comes resurrection. Deadpool and Wolverine walking out of the void is Marvel's way of saying nothing is really gone. The Fox X-Men films we thought were over? They're not. The alternate Fantastic Four we thought were buried? They're not. Even universes that seemed irrelevant can claw their way back when the multiverse cracks wide open. And this is exactly the kind of chaotic energy that makes Doomsday inevitable. Because once Deadpool and Wolverine prove that discarded timelines can return, what stops every other universe from doing the same? That's not just messy, it's catastrophic. The void isn't a dumping ground anymore. It's a door. And in Doomsday, that door won't stay closed. And here's where the mutants' arrival becomes more than just a cameo. In Endgame, the Avengers saved their universe. But Doomsday isn't about saving a single world, it's about saving all of them. That means the Avengers can't do it alone. They need numbers, powers, and perspectives they've never had before. Enter the X-Men. Deadpool and Wolverine are just the first crack. Once the mutants enter the MCU proper, the floodgates open. Suddenly, Endgame's version of everyone is here during the final battle against Thanos feels small. Imagine Doomsday, not just Avengers running through portals, but mutants, variants, alternate universes, Fantastic Four explorers, even villains forced into uneasy alliances. Endgame was the climax of one saga. Doomsday is the collapse of all sagas, folding in on each other. And the mutants aren't guests in that story. They're reinforcements. Without them, the Avengers are hopelessly outnumbered. With them, they stand a chance, if they can trust each other. Which brings us back to the Fantastic Four, because their arrival is timed perfectly. Deadpool and Wolverine bring chaos, mutants bring scale, but the Fantastic Four bring understanding. Reed Richards is the one who's going to look at the chaos and actually map it. In Endgame, Bruce Banner explained time travel like a scientist. But Reed will explain the multiverse, like a cartographer mapping a collapsing world. He'll see the patterns no one else can. He'll see how Steve Rogers' branch with Peggy isn't just a romantic choice, but the first destabilizing crack. He'll see how Loki's sacrifice at the end of his series holds the timelines together, but barely. He'll see how the TVA's collapse left the void overflowing with discarded universes. And he'll be the one to say, this isn't random. Someone is orchestrating this collapse. That someone, of course, is Doctor Doom. And the second Reed says his name, Doomsday stops being abstract. It becomes personal. Because Doom isn't just a villain who takes advantage of chaos. He's a man who wants to build a new world on the ashes of the old. And that's the transition we're heading toward. Endgame gave us heroes winning the war at impossible cost. Doomsday is going to give us heroes realizing that their greatest victories planted the seeds of their greatest defeat. Steve's choice, Loki's death, Deadpool's irreverence, Wolverine's tragedy, Reed's discovery, all of them are dominoes tipping toward the same conclusion. And in the middle of it all is Doom. Waiting, patient, ready to turn Endgame's cracks into his empire. That's why when I think about the flow of these films, I don't see Endgame as an ending anymore. I see it as a prologue. The war hasn't been won. It hasn't even started. And when Doomsday comes, it won't just test the Avengers. It'll test every hero, every mutant, every explorer, and every survivor the multiverse can throw onto the battlefield. Because if they can't stop Doom, then Endgame wasn't a victory. It was the setup for the darkest chapter the MCU has ever seen. The moment the mutants in Fantastic Four begin to share the same stage as the Avengers, the MCU stops feeling like a series of connected franchises and starts feeling like a living, breathing multiverse. Think about Endgame's finale. Portals opening, armies clashing, every Avenger side by side. Now amplify that to a cosmic scale. Instead of portals just opening across Wakanda or Titan, imagine entire universes colliding, broken timelines spilling into each other like floodwaters. That's what the build-up to Doomsday is pointing toward. The X-Men don't arrive quietly. Their history, their enemies, their pain, all come with them. The Fantastic Four don't step in as rookies either. They arrive as explorers who have already touched the fabric of alternate realities. And suddenly, the Avengers aren't the leaders anymore. They're one piece of a puzzle far bigger than anything Tony, Steve, or Natasha ever imagined. That shift from Avengers as the center to Avengers as one faction is what makes Doomsday feel inevitable. Because in a war for the multiverse, no one team gets to sit at the top. And yet with new blood comes new friction. The X-Men aren't soldiers trained to follow Captain America's orders. They're a persecuted people who have fought wars of survival on their own turf for decades. When they step into the Avengers world, it won't be seamless unity. It will be distrust, conflicting philosophies, and personal grudges bleeding into the battlefield. Imagine Wolverine's skepticism toward anyone claiming leadership. Imagine Cyclops' resentment of human heroes who only now notice mutants when the multiverse is falling apart. Imagine Storm, Magneto, and others who will see the chaos not as a tragedy, but as a chance to rewrite the rules entirely. The Fantastic Four, meanwhile, operate differently too. They're a family before they're a team. Their loyalty isn't to an organization, it's to each other. When Reed Richards warns of doom, when Sue insists on prioritizing family over strangers, when Johnny and Ben clash with egos like Thor or Hulk, these conflicts won't destroy the alliance, but they will fracture it. And Doom thrives on fractures. Endgame taught us heroes unite when pushed hard enough. Doomsday will teach us what happens when too many egos, too many traumas, and too many worlds collide. This is exactly why the multiverse war feels so much darker than Endgame's Infinity Saga. In Endgame, Thanos was a single enemy with a single goal. He was ruthless, but at least his mission was clear. In Doomsday, there isn't just one enemy. There's the collapse itself. Universes bleeding into each other, rules of physics bending, characters pulled from realities where they were heroes into ones where they're villains. The war isn't just against a person, it's against entropy. Doom, of course, becomes the opportunist in that storm, but the chaos is already happening before he strikes. That means every hero is fighting on two fronts, against the collapse and against Doom. And the worst part, Many of them won't realize which is which until it's too late. Endgame was hard because Tony had to sacrifice himself. Doomsday will be harder because the battlefield itself is collapsing beneath everyone's feet. And if we look closely, the seeds of Doom's rise have been planted in plain sight. Endgame showed us heroes rewriting destiny, bending rules to achieve a happy ending. But villains like Doom see those bends as opportunities. Steve Rogers choosing Peggy wasn't just romantic. To Doom, it was proof that the strongest Avenger could be swayed by personal desire. Loki's sacrifice wasn't just noble. To Doom, it was proof that gods could trap themselves in eternal prisons if pushed the right way. Deadpool and Wolverine dragging the Fox universes into play wasn't just chaotic. To Doom, it was proof that discarded realities could be weaponized. And Reed Richards discovering the truth wasn't just intellectual curiosity. To Doom, it was an invitation. Every step Endgame's Fallout created is a lesson Doom can twist. That's what makes him so terrifying. He doesn't need to break the rules. He just needs to wait for heroes to do it themselves, then step into the cracks they leave behind. When the Fantastic Four enter the picture, the dynamic changes even more dramatically. Reed Richards will recognize Doom long before the Avengers or X-Men understand who he is. Their rivalry isn't just personal, it's cosmic. Reed represents hope that knowledge can save the multiverse. Doom represents the certainty that knowledge can control it. That ideological clash is bigger than Tony versus Thanos because it isn't about stopping destruction, it's about who gets to rebuild. The X-Men will be torn between trusting Reed's optimism and siding with Doom's pragmatism. The Avengers will be caught in the middle, unsure whether Doom is just another tyrant or someone who actually has the power to stabilize what they can't. And this is where Doomsday becomes dangerous. Because unlike Thanos, who snapped half the universe into dust, Doom offers a deal. He offers survival in exchange for surrender. And in a collapsing multiverse, that temptation is stronger than any Infinity Stone. Here's the chilling part. The multiverse doesn't collapse all at once. It starts slowly. Branches disappear. Worlds overlap. Small anomalies, a mutant in the wrong world, a Fantastic Four variant lost in the wrong timeline become more frequent. At first, the Avengers think they can fix it. Reed thinks he can calculate it. Loki thinks he can hold it. But piece by piece, the collapse accelerates. And every time they fail, Doom looks more like the answer. In Endgame, the fight was about hope versus despair. In Doomsday, the fight is about control versus chaos. And if we've learned anything from Marvel's storytelling, it's that chaos always wins in the short term. That's why Doom's rise feels inevitable, not because he's stronger, but because the battlefield itself tilts in his favor. Every mistake, every fracture, every ego clash among the heroes is another step closer to Doom's throne. So when we look back at Endgame in light of this, it's almost haunting. That final shot of Steve dancing with Peggy feels warm, nostalgic, peaceful. But now, it feels like the first domino. It feels like the choice that cracked the sacred timeline just wide enough for all of this to pour out. Endgame was the hero's gift to themselves. Doomsday is the cost of that gift. And as the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Deadpool, Wolverine, Loki, and the remnants of the Avengers all collide in the war for existence, Doom won't be the one chasing power. He'll be the one standing calmly in the eye of the storm, letting everyone else destroy themselves until they finally realize the truth. The end of Endgame was never the end at all. It was the beginning of his reign. The collapse of the multiverse doesn't come with one single cataclysmic event. It comes like 1,000 small cracks spreading at once, each one leading to another fracture, each one spiraling into chaos. That's why in Avengers Doomsday, the battlefield won't look like Wakanda or New York. It will look like everything. Universes overlapping, realities colliding, cities from different timelines fused together into impossible landscapes. It's the MCU's version of Battleworld, a patchwork of broken dimensions stitched together by the only man ruthless enough to turn collapse into creation, Dr. Doom. This is where the payoff hits. Every branch Steve Rogers left behind, every choice Loki made in the TVA, every timeline pruned into the void, every mutant Deadpool and Wolverine dragged into play, every calculation Reed Richards failed to contain, it all leads here. Doom doesn't just exploit the collapse, he becomes the architect of it. He takes the chaos left behind by Endgame and molds it into a throne. Now picture this. The heroes finally gather. Not just the Avengers we know, but the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, even wildcard players from alternate realities that stumbled through the cracks. On paper, this sounds unstoppable, an army unlike anything Endgame ever assembled. But unity isn't easy. Old grudges flare. Philosophies clash. Who leads? Is it Sam Wilson carrying Steve's shield? Is it Reed Richards, whose genius sees farther than anyone else? Is it Charles Xavier guiding the mutants into a war not of their choosing? Or is it Loki, the god who sacrificed everything to hold the multiverse together? This is where the brilliance of Doomsday lies. The heroes' numbers don't guarantee victory. Their disunity feeds Doom's rise. While they argue, Doom builds. While they fracture, Doom unites his vision. Where Thanos imposed balance by destruction, Doom imposes order by dominion. He offers the multiverse a cruel truth. Only one reality can survive, and under his rule, that reality will be perfect. But this is where Loki's sacrifice becomes the fulcrum of the story. Remember, he's the god of stories now, the one holding the timelines together like threads in a vast loom. In Doomsday, Doom will challenge that directly. He won't just threaten the heroes with armies or weapons. He'll threaten existence itself by ripping those threads from Loki's hands and weaving them into his own design. Imagine the tragedy of it. Loki, who finally found purpose beyond himself, forced to watch as his sacrifice is corrupted. Doom doesn't need to kill Loki. He just needs to repurpose what Loki has built. That's the ultimate inversion of Endgame's legacy. Tony gave his life to save existence. Loki gave his freedom to sustain it. Doom takes both sacrifices and twists them into a weapon for himself. And suddenly, the victory of Endgame looks like the setup for the greatest theft in Marvel history. Doom stealing the multiverse itself. Deadpool and Wolverine, though, bring something unique to this climactic war. They don't fit the mold of noble Avengers or idealistic explorers. They're broken, scarred, and in Deadpool's case, completely unhinged. But that's exactly why they matter. When heroes argue over leadership, Deadpool ignores the rules. When Doom offers temptation, Wolverine sees through it, having lived under tyrants before. Their presence is a reminder that chaos cuts both ways. Doom thrives on it, yes, but so does resistance. Deadpool's unpredictability makes him impossible to control. Wolverine's resilience makes him impossible to break. Together, they represent the wild card factor, the proof that even in a story where every move seems calculated, there's always room for surprise. And if Doomsday is going to be the climax of everything seeded in Endgame, it won't just be Loki's threads or Reed's logic that save the day. It'll also be the sheer unpredictability of characters like Deadpool who break the narrative itself in order to flip the script. The X-Men's role here is even more profound. For decades in their own universe, they've been fighting to survive, to be accepted, to have a place in the world. Now, in Doomsday, they're thrust into a war that isn't just about their world, it's about all worlds. That shift forces them into a new kind of leadership. Charles Xavier's dream of coexistence becomes tested on a multiversal scale. Magneto's vision of dominance suddenly finds eerie parallels in Doom's philosophy. Cyclops, Storm, Jean, all of them bring perspectives the Avengers never considered. And for once, the Avengers aren't the veterans. They're learning from the X-Men, who've already lived through extinction-level threats countless times. This is the MCU's way of finally elevating mutants not as guests, but as equals. Endgame gave the Avengers their victory lap. Doomsday gives the X-Men their battlefield. One where they aren't just backup, but central figures in deciding the fate of everything. And then there's the Fantastic Four. Their presence in Doomsday is different from the X-Men's because they're not fighters by nature, they're explorers. Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben represent curiosity, resilience, and the drive to push boundaries. That perspective is essential in a war where boundaries no longer exist. Reed's calculations will reveal what no one else sees, that Doom isn't just building a battle world, he's consolidating realities into a single one, removing anything that doesn't serve his design. Sue will become the heart of the team, grounding the chaos with compassion when other heroes start losing hope. Ben and Johnny will clash with Avengers and mutants alike, but their loyalty to each other will remind the larger group what's at stake: family, survival, and love. That family dynamic becomes the antidote to Doom's cold vision of order. And in the end, that's what the Fantastic Four bring to Doomsday. Not just science, not just power, but humanity in the face of godlike ambition. Now, as all these threads converge, the climax becomes clear. Doom sits on his throne in Battleworld, a reality stitched together from the ashes of Endgame's choices. Loki's sacrifice is strained to the breaking point. Reed Richards recognizes that science alone can't save them. The Avengers realize their unity isn't guaranteed anymore. The X-Men grapple with whether to trust Doom or oppose him. Deadpool and Wolverine are chaos embodied, breaking rules even Doom can't predict. And through it all, the echoes of Endgame hang heavy. Steve's choice with Peggy, Tony's sacrifice, Natasha's fall, Loki's death, the TVA's collapse, none of it was closure. It was the prelude. Doomsday is the price. And the final battle won't just decide who survives. It will decide whether Endgame's sacrifices meant anything at all. The resolution, when it comes, won't be clean. Heroes will fall. Worlds will be lost. Sacrifices will echo. But the point of Doomsday isn't to erase Endgame's legacy, it's to reframe it. Endgame gave us peace, but fragile peace. Doomsday shows us that peace shattered into war. And when the dust settles, the survivors, Avengers, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Loki, Deadpool, Wolverine will stand together not because they want to, but because they have to. Doom's defeat, if it comes, won't be total. He'll linger, a shadow across the multiverse. But his rise will forever change how we view Endgame. Because what looked like a happy ending was actually the birth of Marvel's darkest chapter. And when the MCU looks back, they'll see the truth. Endgame wasn't the finale. It was the spark. Doomsday is the fire. And that's where this theory lands. Captain America altering the timeline, Loki's death and variant arc, Deadpool and Wolverine tearing open the void, the X-Men and Fantastic Four stepping into the MCU, and Dr. Doom rising from the cracks. All of it connects directly back to Endgame. What we thought was closure was actually the trigger. What we thought was peace was actually the setup for collapse. And what we thought was the end of an era was actually the beginning of Doomsday. So, if you've stayed with me through this breakdown, thank you. I hope this theory has made you see Endgame in a whole new light and given you a glimpse into how Doomsday might just become Marvel's boldest story yet. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep diving into these deep breakdowns. And a special shout out to everyone who's supported with super thanks, especially the $20 contributions, which make an enormous difference in keeping MovieCast running strong. Until next time, I'm Liam Harrison, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.